Hello and welcome back to Bites of History with Irene Walton. I'm your host, Irene Walton, even if I don't sound like it.
Have you ever wondered how it made it to your table? Have you ever wondered how it made it to your shelf? If you love food, then this is the show for you. Bites of History with Irene.
I have just been under the weather for the past couple days. I've been going through it the past couple days. I'll tell you what, I didn't put up a Friday video. I hope that my voice is not unlistenable to, because I'm really excited about this episode. It's really tricky because a lot of times I want to start these episodes and be like, here's this crazy thing, but you already know from like the title and the thumbnail and all of the information that you get before the podcast even starts. Regardless of that, I'm still super excited because I was shocked to learn all of this stuff about Guinness and the Guinness Book of World Records. We're going to have such a great episode, but first, I want to thank all of my patrons. Thank you guys so very much. Your support for this show and for my YouTube channel and just for everything I do is so wonderful and so deeply appreciated. I am so grateful to have you. Thank you for being there. And if you would like to join the Patreon, you can check it out at patreon.com/Irene Walton. Thank you so much. I also want to say thank you to my sources. I am so appreciative and grateful to live in a time where I can type anything into Google and it comes up with a billion different answers, literally. So thank you so much. Well, thanks to Google. I don't say thank you to Google enough, but thank you, Google. And an extra thank you to IrelandBeforeYouDie.com, culturalworld.org, wikipedia.org, and GuinnessWorldRecords.com. Thank you guys so much. So here's why I'm so excited about this episode. I love world records. My brother and I used to watch Ripley's Believe It or Not all the time. I love like weird little stories, weird little facts. I mean, you guys know that's my whole podcast is food history and like weird food things. So I'm sure it comes to no surprise that I was very much a Guinness Book of World Records kid. And by that, like, that's the book I would always get from the library. That's the book I would always like be excited to see in a store. I honestly don't think we ever had one. They were really, really expensive. Understandably so. A lot goes into making them, but I don't think we ever had one. So I would like borrow it from the library a lot, stuff like that. So a couple episodes ago, back in episode 37, I was talking about the Guinness Brewery and just the story of, what's his name? Alfred Guinness? Arthur Guinness. The story of Arthur Guinness and buying the thing and I was in a Crumbs of History. That sort of stuck in my head and I was like, Guinness beer, Guinness World Records. Hey, hold on. Are these two connected? And I think everybody's always so excited to find out and learn that like the Michelin guide is the same Michelin as Michelin tires, which I did a whole episode about. However, I think that was before I started doing videos. So if you want to listen to that, it is episode 11 back in the like podcast archive. So you can check that out. Super interesting story as well. But I was like, are Guinness beer and Guinness World Records connected too? Turns out they are. Oh my God. My poor voice is like, shut up. Stop yelling about Guinness. I obviously got super interested in the story and how it came to be, and I can't wait to share it with you guys. So the next time you're drinking a Guinness beer, you're going to have a very interesting story to share. Now, before we get into the real creation of the Guinness Book of World Records, there are two things that are important to know prior. So the first thing that is important to know is that in the year 1951, there were two journalist brothers. Their names were Ross and Norris McWhirter. Now, they had a fledgling publishing company that sort of specialized in writing articles about very commonly asked questions. So they were really good researchers. It was sort of like an Ask Abby advice article, but not necessarily like for advice. It would just be interesting things to know about in newspapers and magazines. So that's what they were doing in 1951. Now, the second thing to note before we really dive into this story is that in the early 1950s, Sir Hugh Beaver was the managing director at Guinness Brewery in Ireland. So those two things are both happening in the early 50s. Now, at the Guinness Brewery, there was an executive there named Christopher Chataway. Christopher Chataway was a track and field Olympian. He was a star. And at some point, the McWhorter brothers had interviewed him for one of their articles that they were doing. And since Christopher Chataway was working at Guinness, he was an executive there, he obviously knew Sir Hugh Beaver, but this didn't connect quite yet. So the McWhorters do their interview with Christopher Chataway. Great, done. They go back to their publishing company, and Christopher Chataway is back at Guinness. Now, somewhere in the year 1954, Sir Hugh Beaver goes on a hunting trip with some friends. They go on this trip at the River Sanely in County Wexford. Now, since they are hunting, they are getting into, a couple of interesting debates about the game that they're hunting. One of which is, what is the fastest game bird in Europe? Now, it seems that about half of the people thought that the fastest game bird was the golden plover, and that the other half thought that it was the red grouse. I know these birds sound like I'm just making up birds that would be in the UK, but I'm not. Now, upon trying to settle this debate, Sir Hugh Beaver found out, which I know is a hilarious name. Believe me, I know. Now, upon trying to settle this debate, Sir Beaver figures out that there's not really a resource to answer this question. There wasn't a ton of information on what happened next, but here's how I imagine it went. Sir Beaver is kind of just ruminating on this after this hunting trip. He goes back to work and he's like, there's really nowhere to answer these little silly questions of not super heavy consequence, Interesting. I'm at work. I'm at Guinness. I'm an executive. And then he's probably sharing this. He's, my hunting trip was good, but we got into this little debate. Which is the fastest game bird? The golden plover, the red grouse? And people are like, I think it's this one. I think it's this one. And then I would imagine that someday at lunch or something with the executives, he brings this up and he's like, I think it'd be really cool to create a guide or a resource that could answer these questions and be the definitive source on if something is or isn't the fastest or the slowest or the longest or the largest or whatever. Now, at this point, I think that Christopher Chataway, who is the Olympic track star who the McWhorters had interviewed before, was probably it's funny you should ask that. I know these two journalists, that's kind of their bread and butter. They're really good at researching stuff and getting definitive answers on things, so maybe you should reach out to them. And I think that's exactly what happened. I think that Sir Hugh Beaver met the McWhorter brothers and was like, let's make this book. I want the answer. Who's the fastest bird? The red glover or the golden goose? No, it's the opposite. But you know what I mean. So basically, that's exactly what happens. And the goal of this book is to do just that. It's to answer these silly sort of pub arguments and be a resource for definitive bet winning, basically. Because that's something you could be I think it's the red grouse. And somebody's like, I think it's the golden plover, whatever it is. And then somebody could open the book and be like, oh, give me that $5 you said you'd give me. So they start working on this book. It's 1954 and they're putting in thousands of hours of research. These brothers are trying so hard to get just definitive answers from experts. So they're even writing to astrophysicists and gerontologists and all of these different things. And finally, after all of these letters are written, all of these questions are asked, all of these experts are cited, the book is done. In the summer of 1955, our 198-page Guinness book is complete. Now, what's interesting is they only made 1,000 copies because they were really just giving it out as a piece of promotional material for bars that carried Guinness. So they only printed 1,000 copies because they were like, oh, the bar will keep it there. People grab it if they need to get a question answered. End of story. But the book was a smash hit in the UK and Ireland, and it got super, super popular. They needed to make way more copies. And Sir Hugh Beaver was like, I think this could be a real thing. Let's get the McWhorters their own office space so that they can start working on the next edition of the book. And the McWhorters wanted this to be a new annually revised thing. So they were getting rid of information that was maybe no longer accurate, adding new information. They were putting in so much work. And so the next time when the book was published for a second edition and sold to the public, it sold 50,000 copies. Now, by Christmas of 1956, this book was the top bestseller in the UK on all of the charts. And then not even 4 years later, in 1960, there are 500,000 copies of the book sold. And 6 years after that, in 1966, triple it, baby. Triple it and give it to the next person because 1,500,000 copies of the Guinness Book of World Records are sold. There was also a Guinness TV show that ran for 29 years called Record Breakers. Apparently it was super, super popular. And the Guinness Book is out here breaking records as well. It is the most sold copyrighted book of all time. It is also the book most often stolen from libraries. I never stole it, but it is the most stolen book from libraries. Now, if you were wondering if the two are still linked, are Guinness Beer and Guinness World Records still connected? They unfortunately, or fortunately, I mean, I don't really know. I don't have too much stake in this game. But they actually are not connected any longer. That doesn't happen until 2001. I couldn't really figure out why. It seemed like a lot of like kind of boring business stuff. But what I found on Wikipedia was sort of just like, there was a lawsuit and then they paid out this much and then they decided to separate. Kind of boring stuff. Nothing, whatever. But since these were two such well-established brands, it didn't seem wise to like change the name. So that's why they are both still called Guinness in their own respects. I know this was a bit of a quicker episode, but I just thought it was so interesting and I had to share with you guys. I'm so excited to have learned about this. Everybody's just always so excited about the Michelin one and nobody knows about this one. And I think it's cool too. Anyway, thank you so much for taking a bite out of history with me this week. I can't wait to take a bite out of history with you next week. And I hope you have a wonderful day. Drink some water. Join the Patreon. Like, comment, subscribe. Leave me a 5-star review while you're at it. If you're already doing me a favor, do me another. Thank you guys for listening. I love you. Mwah!